Humans are not inherently rational. I'm not even sure where the idea that we were came from. We're pushed around by countless emotions that we don't understand and are driven by lust, love, hate, or joy to live the lives that we do. Almost all of our actions are driven by a desire to get things that we subjectively want. You might rationally try to get money or sex, but that's driven by your emotional animal desires for status and procreating, or even through love to provide for the people in your life. People often accept that they are driven by emotion, but fail to see that emotions power the history of the world and the societies they live in. What this video will show is that emotions drive entire civilizations, with entire cycles of history being propelled off one emotion or another. Entire cultures can be built around a single emotion, with their actions being impossible to understand without seeing that underlying emotion. Prepare for an insane ride that will totally change how you view the world. In Eastern religions, there's an idea of the monkey brain, or most people do not have real control over their own subconscious, which rattles from topic to topic inside their heads without any space for reflection or calmness. This anxiety is also added to in that modern society feels like a rat race without any time for ourselves. Time management's an important skill for anyone trying to get their life together, and I recently saw a series on Skillshare by Thomas Frank, who helps people develop systems to manage their time better and move in a more positive direction. His series, Productivity for Creatives, Build a System That Brings Out Your Best, is an excellent series of developing skills to get your life in order. Skillshare offers classes on a wide variety of topics that are sure to engage you and teach you a new skill that can offer opportunities not available by just going through the motions of everyday life. Skillshare has countless courses on topics ranging from art to business to cooking and almost anything else you can think of. If you're looking to find a new way to better yourself, explore a new idea, or learn something cool, Skillshare has hundreds of classes for you to explore. For my viewers, Skillshare is offering the first 1,000 people to use the link below a 1-month free trial on Skillshare, allowing you to check out their content and see for yourself what it can do to encourage your creativity and help you explore something new. The way I'm going to explain these emotions is that people need to find something to agree over for civilization to be able to operate. Getting humans to cooperate is difficult as a whole, and so there needs to be shared assumptions that people can all understand are important. The theory I have behind this is based upon a book I read that's really brilliant named The Worm at the Core, which is about how every single action we do in our lives is driven off death, and how without the boundaries provided by death, nothing really matters. Every moment of our lives, we are aware of our own deaths, and we try our best to create some sort of immortality or another. This point will gradually make more and more sense as this video continues, as each of these emotions are a way to deal with death in one form or another. You may notice that all of these emotions are negative, and I believe this is the case since, as physics says, energy must be pulled from somewhere, and there must fundamentally be balances and forces, with every reaction coming a counter-reaction. Thus, for the positive force of social cooperation, we need to pull on negative emotions. Also, we are much more motivated against things than towards. You are much more scared of getting eaten by a tiger than getting a new Honda Civic. Thus, our societies can unify more strongly against what we don't want than towards what we do want. I'm going to go through each of these emotions through the era of history in which they developed or gained the largest predominance in society. In some ways, it's almost an emotional or spiritual history of the world. This is a strange connection, but in some ways it reminds me of what the mystery schools of the pre-modern world taught. The priest classes of ancient cultures like the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, as well as the early teachers of world religions like the Christians, Hindus, and Jews, had certain very similar secret teachings about the universe that their priest classes would share, but which they wouldn't tell the public since they just weren't ready for it. Later thinkers like Isaac Newton, the Masons, or the alchemists were obsessed with this ancient wisdom. Mark Booth's A Secret History of the World is a fascinating book on this subject. They taught that the universe was a dream of the cosmic mind or God, which was further divided into 7 gods or universal principles. These 7 gods would manifest in different forms, with strange connections between each other, kind of like string theory, between stuff like the metal Mercury, the god Mercury, the planet Mercury, the art of healing, and messages and the like. I'll probably make a video explaining this in greater depth at some point. However, they believe that these 7 principles were played out over history by God to allow humanity's development towards greater and greater consciousness in God's plan of reproducing himself. Kind of like how a mother has a child. I'm not here to say whether or not this theory is true. It so affronts our current sensibilities that it's hard to get a modern audience to believe in it, but I thought it was a fascinating parallel to the view of the world I have here with 7 emotions, a number I arrived at through coincidence. In fact, there are almost certainly more of these emotions that I'm yet to have figured out, that play out over human history, in fact allowing us greater degrees of control over the world and consciousness. 3.5 of the emotions on this list are specifically recognized by the science of anthropology as driving civilizations, and the rest are ones that I invented or figured out by myself. No society is perfectly any one of these emotions. Latin American countries, for example, are a combination of every single one of these emotions. However, in this video, we will study the societies that most manifest each emotion, and in doing so, see each emotion's strengths and weaknesses. Number 1. Fear. Most Westerners don't understand the God of the Old Testament at all. They view him as unnecessarily harsh and often even vaguely evil. He did stuff like kill every newborn son in Egypt, drive the Israelites into the desert for 40 years for disrespecting him in a single night, or nearly making Abraham kill his son for not really a good reason. There even was a sect of Christians around the time of the fall of Rome called the Gnostics, which believed the God of the Old Testament was literally Satan. However, the God of the Old Testament was doing what gods had to do in that era, in fear-based societies, in which the only way to enforce moral standards was through power. Fear-based societies predominate in tribal cultures. The areas that are the most fear-based today are the native peoples in places like Latin America or Africa, where in places like Southeast Asia and large parts of the Third World, along with places like China, it's often a pretty powerful minority force. In the ancient world, fear-based cultures were the norm, with them being the driving religious forms in ancient Babylon, Rome, or Egypt. Fear used to be the only main moral unifying force in society. Once you dig, you find that fear is the most primal motivating force in the human mind. It's the oldest part of our brain, the part we share with lizards. Fear is necessary because there are loads of things that want to kill you in the world. And the world is often fundamentally scary, and you need to escape being killed by a lion, contracting a horrible disease, and all that stuff. The fear pillar stems from its universality and how necessary fear is. Fear is a strategy of avoiding death by not getting killed. If you look at the gods and kings of fear-based cultures, they rule through fear. The Old Testament God is a great example, but others are the often petty and cruel ancient Greek gods who needed sacrifices to be appeased, or how Babylon's gods made humanity to be their slaves. On the ruling side, these cultures enforce discipline through fear. Look at how the Assyrians, Mongols, or Romans, all cultures whose religions were fear-based, ruled through fear, killing millions in order to get loyalty. The kings of Assyria would put up propaganda in their palaces and in their capital, showing them torturing their opponents horrifically, making them do stuff like having a father crush his son's own bones, since that was the main way you got people to follow you in that era. Look at Africa, the most fear-driven society in the world today, where powerful leaders show off their prowess through their ability to crush their opponents and have as many wives as possible, rather than through their own integrity or responsibility. These cultures don't view the world in rational terms, since fear is not rational, it's part of the lizard brain, but rather in animist terms, with each spirit being individual and needing placating in its own way. These cultures view the world as a series of spirits, with the gods just being the most powerful spirits. I read a book on Thai culture that described the traditional Thai worldview as a jungle of competing magical and spiritual forces, with Buddha just being the most powerful spirit you could pull magic from. However, once you get large empires, like the partially Romans, Assyrians, Chinese, and the like, empires can no longer be built off fear, normally with horrifying atrocities, as there are no moral restrictions. You can often see the change away from fear-based systems happen in real time if you look for it across the historic record. One example being with Draco in 6th century BC Athens, where Draco tried to construct a legal code in which the penalty for everything was death. If you loitered, death, stole an apple, death. And Draco once said he wished there was a penalty worse than death, because his thinking from a fear-based system was that if you give the death penalty for everything, everyone will have to act their best for fear of dying. But it just became tyrannical and is the origin of the word draconian. Another example comes from 3rd century BC BC China, where the legalist Qin dynasty also had a very similar system where they had the death penalty for very minor things. And what ended up happening was that the revolution that destroyed said regime happened because a group of men were supposed to arrive at an army muster point, but they ran late due to having a lot of rains in their area and flooding. And then, because the penalty for arriving late was death, they just launched the revolution that destroyed said regime because they were dead men anyway. Lots of people will say that countries like modern North Korea are fear-based. And that's partially true, but I don't count them here as that because they don't have the fear-based cultural system and all the history that comes with the idea of various gods built off fear. If you're looking at a totalitarian regime in which people only follow that regime out of fear, what's normally the case is that people supported the revolution to get that regime in power, operating off a different moral axis, like we'll talk about envy or disgust later, but since that moral axis is weak, once the government seizes power, they default back onto fear as the most powerful motivator to keep people supporting the regime. Number 2, shame. Shame is by far the biggest of these emotions across history. It's still the case that a majority of cultures around the world, and especially a majority of the world's inhabitants, are driven off shame. It's most powerful in the big Asian civilizations, with Pakistan, Japan, China, Iraq, and the like, being some very shame-driven cultures. However, most cultures, even outside Asia, are shame-based, with it either being dominant or a big minority across Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and also pretty powerful in pre-Christian European civilizations like the Roman Empire or the ancient Greeks. In fact, the only major area of the world that has basically no shame is Western Europe and Western civilization. I have a lot of respect for this social system since it's by far the most stable and best tested, stretching back thousands of years and developing independently across the world. Shame develops when a society needs to operate on a certain scale of size. Hunter-gatherer peoples, with the Native Americans of the current United States often being a great example, are often incredibly individualistic. But once you get into large farming urban societies, shame-based cultures start to predominate. In these societies, an individual is the pawn of their family. These societies live in large clans, with people often working, marrying, and living together as a family, with the clan providing strength in numbers. Arranged marriages are the norm, and the individual is basically given very little choice in life. These societies deflect responsibility from the individual to the group. The most purely shame-driven societies without other axes are the rice farming cultures, where rice farming is so labor-intensive and groupish that groups that sacrificed the individual for the group did the best. An interesting thing is that a gene that controls for a lot of risk-taking, extroversion, and the like varies from 80% in the fear-driven native peoples of the Amazon to 0% among the East Asians, since those kinds of people didn't survive in the conformity-based rice farming societies. Interesting studies show that people in shame-based cultures literally view the world differently. When looking at photos, Japanese or Chinese point out details in the background, and Westerners look at the main character. Westerners see the world through cause and effect, while Orientals is a series of different holistic relations. The advantage of shame-based culture is just their sheer inner strength. Writers used to talk about the immortal East, or how empires would rise and fall in the West, but China and India have always stood there, taking often the worst suffering possible, casually losing tens of millions of lives, but they keep their spirit and keep doing their thing. As I talked about in this video, family is possibly one of the most important factors in how society works, and I can't help but think of the extremely strong families made these societies strong at their core. Shame is the feeling of transgressing across the group. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, young girls who have premarital sex, often horrifyingly even caused by rape, are killed by their brothers, since their actions bring shame across the whole clan. In Japan, surrendering would bring shame across the whole Japanese nation, which could only be stopped by suicide, which is why the Japanese had mass kamikaze and banzai attacks in World War II. These cultures don't see the individual as separate from their group. Most of the harshest East Asian regimes punish people for crimes their relatives have committed. In North Korea, Maoist China, or in late medieval China, it was pretty common punishment where entire families of people would be killed for the transgressions of a single individual. In these societies, people build their identities off their group and social role, with deviation from it, or personal individuality, viewed as awkward and immature. The negative side of shame-based cultures are that the group, since it is deified, is capable of horrifying evils. Since these cultures are built off worshipping the group, there are no protections against the tyrannies of family or culture. They have no idea of external truth and no standard to hold their cultures against. Shame-based cultures are uniformly terrible to women, often keeping them at home for their whole lives, binding their feet, cutting off their genitals, or burning widows, since these cultures don't have critical thought, naturally oppress women as a way to incentivize men, the stronger sex, to work in society harder. Basically telling men, sacrifice yourself to your society, and in exchange your wife will be your slave. These societies often have brutal inhumanities and cruelties, although due to their conservatism, they're nowhere near the worst on this list, since they respect tradition, and tradition has to be what's worked for hundreds of years, so it can't be too bad. And this includes Islam and Africa's mass slavery, practiced basically until the present, the statist inhumanities of China or Japan, or the caste system in India. Human rights and democracies have often been shoved down these cultures' throats by Western Christian colonialism and conversions. One of my good friends was visiting Japanese Disney World, need I remind you, part of an American company, and they showed the Japanese view of Japanese history. They portrayed the West's influence, including World War II, as barbarian invasions defiling the pure Japanese nation, and said they did absolutely nothing wrong in World War II. The Japanese have never apologized for their horrifying atrocities in World War II, including killing 20 million people, let I remind you, unlike Germany, since their shame-based culture would view apologizing as an insult to their whole nation. To bring up another example from Disney, the opening scene of Mulan is one of the best representations of shame cultures I've seen, and explained very easily for Western audiences, where Mulan is this girl from 200 BC China, and in the song Honor for Us All, she's being dolled up to have the matchmaker give her as good a match as possible, and they're going through, if Mulan fits all these cultural expectations, she will bring honor upon her family, showing a culture that holds society's social standards to be the ultimate goal you can reach. Shame-based cultures have a concept of face, or the need to uphold your social image at all costs so as to not dishonor your whole community. This is why Xi, the premier of China, is pushing for COVID-0 and brutal lockdowns that are literally starving people, since to admit he did anything wrong, or allow any disobedience to succeed, would dishonor the whole Chinese Communist Party. There's an interesting story where the Indonesian government refused to get aid from the US military in the aftermath of the horrifying 2004 tsunami, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, since it would shame the local government of the province of Aceh and their face by making them look weak. At its worst, shame-based cultures actively push what amounts to lies and inhumanity, since they can't swallow their own pride. These cultures have immense trouble innovating, since they can only view the world through tradition, and innovations normally threaten their power. Look at how China invented gunpowder, the compass, and the printing press, and they didn't use any of that. All the shame-based cultures went through a phase of making themselves deliberately poor through crushing their merchant classes, since merchants and capitalism disrupt tradition. All the major Asian civilizations ossified into set molds that were totally unable to change before European colonialism cracked them open. Number 3. Pride. This is an emotion that I determined existed from the normal anthropological convention of putting Islam and China into the same shame-based moral system. That didn't sit right with me, since Islam and Christianity are religiously much more similar, and I would say they're broader civilizations as a rule than Islam is to either China or India. There clearly had to be some underlying value that unified Europe and the Middle East, which the eastern half of Asia didn't have. Also, some of the versions of these anthropological texts call it the shame/honor-based system, which also didn't seem right to me, since Western guilt-based societies are often very honor-driven, in ways that you could see all around the world apart from shame. My family's from the British Isles, with my dad's side being Irish, and my mom's side mostly coming from Northern England and Scotland, and both are some of the most guilt-driven societies in the world, but also have very rigid, militarized, and aggressive codes of honor. This brings out the idea of a cultural axis called pride. This being the idea that there are things that are just true, with questioning them being a sign of weakness. These truths should be protected to the death, with these societies often being extremely militaristic and aggressive, normally constantly at war and expanding. Someone once said Islam's borders are colored red. This is the manliest of the 7 value systems. You find this value system in societies in which pride, manliness, and the like are necessary due to constant instability. This often comes in the form of herder societies, in which you need a big reputation of virility so that people don't fuck with you and steal your cows, since they know if they do that, you'll come out and fucking kill them and their family. On top of this, the attitudes that herding and killing animals gives you to the world creates a belief in dominance and honor. The other being warrior nobilities and unstable societies, where the only thing that keeps people from attacking you is your reputation for being a complete badass. Even societies that often wage war, like the Romans or Germans, have this sense of pride. Examples of this come from warrior cultures like the samurai, knights, or Vikings that had codes of honor where dying on your sword is the most honorable thing. A great example of this even further is the Norse and the Germans, whose pagan mythologies said that heaven was an infinite battle where you fought with the gods, which is the most pride-based heaven you could possibly think of. However, this value system is really brought around by warrior-herder societies. In the Middle East, that was nomadic barbarians like the Turks, Iranians, and Arabs, and in Europe, it's been the Indo-Aryan conquerors, who became Europe's ruling class, and inside Europe, herder peoples or societies that are predominantly based off cattle, like the Scots, Irish, Germanic tribes at the time of the Roman Empire, or Vikings, are often the most pride-based, or even the Chechens. Inside Africa as well, you can see the warrior-herder peoples like the Nuer, Zulu, and Maasai also having this value a lot. Another great example of this is the native tribes of the eastern United States like the Huron or Iroquois, where the greatest honor a young man could have would be to be tortured for several days and show absolutely no pain, thus showing his degree of pride to be the greatest possible a man could have while facing death. With some exceptions, this value system is incredibly close with milk consumption because the nomadic herder tribes who drank milk spread this value system around the world. These cultures justify their manliness by, in effect, saying there are things in life worth dying for. To do this, they have very strict moral codes, like the 10 Commandments of do's and don'ts. In fact, it's not a coincidence that the Abrahamic religions were formed by the Arab and Jewish herding peoples. By making these cultural codes so important, it gives a justification to wage war with people who don't follow these moral codes, and also raise the stakes to make their deaths more worthwhile. These cultures deal with death by facing it with courage, laughing at its face. My overwhelmingly young male audience is probably thinking, this sounds so hype, and this is largely a value system for young men. Nietzsche is very much a pride-based philosopher. A society cannot be purely based off pride, since for women, the old and like it doesn't work and you need another moral pillar. In the Middle East, it's shame, and in Europe, that's guilt. In many cases, it's a balancing force. The Indo-European pride and aggressive spirit is balanced with humility and pacifism in Christianity, which has created the civilization that launched the Crusades, while at the same time pushing for women's rights and humility. The modern world really struggles with the idea that humans need to have two contradictory ideas in their head at once to provide psychological balance. And for the West, that's the pacifism of Christianity with the aggressive Indo-Aryan spirit. And we often attack the latter, try to push the first as much as possible today through secular Christianity, which is the West's dominant ideology, but we know the West needed that aggressive Indo-Aryan side because all the Christian territories that don't come from an Indo-Aryan culture were conquered by the Muslims, a more aggressive religion, in like 5 years. In Christianity, pride is the worst of sins, and this is because you act as if you think you are better than God and His law. However, at the same time, for men at least, pride allows the greatest of actions and the most noble things, since men need dignity and a sense of self-respect in order to face the world. I was talking to a friend about this, about how pride allows both the best and the worst of actions, and let's call good pride dignity, and let's call bad pride pride, just for this two-sentence argument. I would say that dignity comes from holding yourself to a higher moral standard, thus allowing the greatest of actions, and pride means you believe that you are better than others and putting them down, and that allows the worst of actions. The brave 300 Spartans who held against the Persians, Socrates drinking poison even when he could escape, or the American revolutionaries fighting for freedom since their honor as men demanded it, are all examples of the pride axis. And when you look at much of the development of civilization itself, it's men's need to have pride and self-esteem. In a cruel world, the most noble thing to do is to hold on to your pride and honor at all costs. A misconception we often have is that we view democracy as egalitarian, while its roots are fundamentally aristocratic. Democracy originated with the Indo-Aryan belief that a free man deserved certain dignity and rights as part of the warband. In all pre-industrial republics, only male landowners could vote, thus making democracy originally aristocratic. Pride is the main thing that gives societies freedom, since each individual has to be respected or he'll kill you. At the same time, pride allows immense horrors. The Nazi Nietzschean barbarian spirit is what happened when pride is removed from any moral tethers and the Nazis just started killing. The proud Indo-Europeans enslaved the peoples they conquered. Feminist philosopher Camille Paglia likes to say that the tragedy of the masculine is like their sex drive. It pushes outwards, does a lot of movement, spends itself, and then retreats back in tiredness. That is pride. Once you set your obelisk up, you ask for others to tear it down. Number 4. Disgust. I have already made a video about disgust as a moral axis, so I'm going to keep this one short. Disgust stems from disease, in that our senses of disgust are driven like a biological car alarm by disease. The things that can bring horrifying diseases or poisons that can kill us cause disgust. People of different races have different gene pools, and the lower classes historically have had more disease, thus making disgust the primary driver of racism, classism, and the like over history. Disgust is an incredibly visceral feeling, and all societies use it to differing degrees as a way of unifying their group against others. In our current societies, the Nazis defy our values of freedom, peace, the individual, and racial equality, thus making them disgusting to us and creating a clear enemy that we could unify our society against, and still do. Different societies often find different things outside the clear disgusting things like shit or disease and the like, disgusting as ways of creating cultural consensus to unify around. However, the degree by which a society has disgust varies on a massive culture-by-culture basis. You can use disgust or dislike of the outside world for good if you play your cards well. The Puritans are a great example, where the Puritans and other religious fanatics can often enforce massive amounts of social conformity from disgust. The Puritans in New England had some of the highest degree of technological advancement, lowest degrees of inequality, highest degrees of wealth, and industrial power of any societies in the world because their senses of disgust and groupishness made sure people did the right things. Societies driven off disgust tend to be pretty racist. An example is traditional India, whose major moral axes are shame and disgust. Hindu cosmology is viewed as an escape from disgust, with the lower castes, or those who had to deal with the physical world like tanners, butchers, janitors, and shit cleaners being called untouchables, and the spiritually pure classes who wash themselves every few hours, having done the most to escape the world's inherently disgusting, degrading nature. Both Hinduism and Buddhism view the physical world as inherently disgusting and degrading, and think you ought to spiritually escape it to a more pure, spiritual plane of existence. It's not a coincidence that India has also historically been the most racist major civilization, with the caste system starting out by separating genetically different kinds of people, Indo-Aryan versus local ancestry, with each caste being incredibly genetically distinct even today, with different castes in the same village often being 3 times as genetically distinct as Norwegians from Sicilians, and the castes not being able to marry, work, eat, wash, or be in proximity to each other or anything else. You can also find disgust-driven cultures where you see different races in proximity. The American South is another example, in which whites were disgusted by blacks and structured their society and legal system so they would share no institutions with them. The word caste originates in Latin America, where the Spanish created a very elaborate system of dozens of racial castes with different roles in society. A point I make is that conservatives are higher in disgust, and so all these heavily disgust-driven societies are also very socially conservative. Disgust is in general a filter that keeps out undesirable things, and so a strong sense of disgust makes these areas socially conservative in most regards. Disgust is necessary because it's used as a way to maintain the traditions of a society, and thus provide a certain degree of stability. The most disgust-driven society of all time was Nazi Germany, which viewed other groups as impurities that would pollute the pure Aryan nation, with Hitler being a notorious clean freak. However, the Nazis also show why there are so few purely disgust-driven cultures. The Nazis knew what they didn't like and had a tremendous amount of unity, bravery, and vigor from that. However, they didn't believe in any other moral axes very strongly, except for pride, and they provoked an alliance of almost literally everyone else in the world against them because everyone else in the world knew that they couldn't trust the Nazis because the Nazis had no other value structure. Disgust-based societies often fall into conservatism since they're unable to change in healthy ways since they find everyone else and everything else inherently disgusting. Number 5. Guilt. This is the dominant cultural form of Western civilization, and the value system most of you are probably most familiar with. Guilt-based cultures believe that the most important thing is for you to be right with God, whether or not your community likes that. These societies are inner-driven, based on internal standards, rather than following group norms. The guilt-based model gradually formed in the Eastern Mediterranean around the time of the Roman Empire. The first person you can find pushing this kind of morality is Socrates, who said you should use logic to find objective moral standards and then push them against the community's morality if the community is doing something wrong. The first large group you find of guilt-based morality were the Stoics, who believed that following your conscience was the most important thing, that we are all responsible for our own actions and lives, and that we are all children of God rather than belonging to one community or another. However, the first people to really bring the guilt-based moral code out were the Christians. Christ's message is in many ways to follow the path of God rather than that of your society. The crucifixion is literally when Christ stood against society's corruption, and Christ talked about how you should leave your family to serve God, and our loyalty is to the spiritual kingdom of heaven rather than the physical government and society. The West is the only major area to be driven predominantly off the emotion guilt. There's a fascinating book on this topic called The Weirdest People in the World by Joseph Heinrich. It covers how the West became an individualistic society. Although there is some evidence from previous Celtic and Germanic inhabitants of northwestern Europe for individualism, but it started in the West in large part when the Catholic Church banned cousin marriage. This resulted in the breaking up of clans, which, as we've seen in shame-based cultures, totally dominate their lives. In the West, people started living as individual households, marrying through love rather than arranged marriages. Starting in the 6th century, we start to see people referred to as individuals, rather than as members of clans in Italian documents. This switch towards the individual meant that people were expected to be responsible for their own fates. Guilt-based societies have a number of extraordinary advantages. One being that since they removed the clan, people have to work through voluntary associations, whether guilds, corporations, monasteries, and the like, thus meaning that these societies have historically had the highest trust of anywhere in the world, since you can't rely on your family. This degree of flexibility has allowed capitalism to develop in that people can move around where and how the market needs them, rather than being tied down by their clan. Guilt-based societies, going back to feudalism, operate through the idea of reciprocal contracts as being the main force in society, rather than respect for hierarchy and tradition. Freedom exists in these societies as a concept since people are conceptualized by their independence, rather than getting their identity through their social relations. Freedom gradually evolved over the Middle Ages until we have modern democracies. These societies make the individual responsible for their own actions, thus meaning individuals' emotional variation is higher than other cultures since their cultures push individuality and creativity. From objective studies, people in Western societies have more fluctuation in their personalities than in less individualistic societies. These cultures' idea that they have to perform against an objective moral standard means that they're able to innovate and create more than any other society. The West's massive technological and social advances over the last 1,000 years, while the rest of the world was largely static, come from the West's more flexible social model. The West's ability to abolish slavery, feudalism, have the Enlightenment, Age of Exploration, Industrial Revolution, Scientific Revolution, women's liberation, and the like, all of which other cultures followed suit from, since its social model allowed change to be acceptable as a way to reach the kingdom of heaven. Western Christian guilt-based societies are the only cultures that are really open to self-criticism. The previous societies of history, other regions in the world, and even the new humanist ideologies like Marxism or fascism all shut down criticism since it goes against the powerful. But guilt-based societies always hold themselves up to God's standard. In all honesty, I think the guilt-based model is by far the best. This is not to say it's perfect or that something better won't come along later, but I think these societies' successes in every single regard speak for themselves, while other cultures change towards the guilt-based model, also speaking to that. However, the main flaw in the guilt-based model is just that it's very expensive to maintain. My friend Kurt Doolittle likes to say that the West always goes for the most expensive cultural technologies, and I think that's fundamentally true. Guilt-based morality is not the norm and requires a lot of training and social effort to keep it operating. Stuff like loving your enemy, thinking rationally, and being open to criticism are not how humans evolved to be. This gives the West a certain degree of instability and precariousness to it. As we're seeing right now, the West continuing to hold itself to its guilt-based standards, even without its God to forgive it, has resulted in the West becoming suicidal. Other cultures don't feel suicidal since they don't have any pretensions except to exist and just continue to procreate. But for the West, who wants to fulfill a divine plan, without a God to forgive it, the weight of holding it up becomes unbearable, thus leading to one of the cultures we'll study later, anxiety. Number 6. Envy. I've already made a video on envy, so I'm going to keep this one short. Envy is different from jealousy in that jealousy is, say, when you're a child and you want your friend's toy truck. Envy is when you want your friend to lose their truck at no gain to yourself, since your friend has happiness that you can't have. Envy is a horrible emotion that ennobles no one, and also drives the history of the world in a very palpable way. Envy evolved as a hedge against massive inequality. Really high inequality is often crippling to societies, and so I'm guessing envy evolved as a group hedge against it. That, or it's just a way to take other people's stuff. One of the best books I've ever read on this topic is an analysis of envy across civilization, and it's named Envy by Helmut Schuck, and I'm basing a lot of my arguments off it. One of the points I make in that video is that envy is very strong across traditional societies, being a big force that holds them back. If you see someone working in the field in Haiti and ask how they're doing, they'll say hardly working, since to suggest they are working might mean they are judging you for not working. If you look at Asian societies, the wealthy often make the exteriors of their homes very plain, so as not to provoke envy, while all their wealth is on the inside. You can also see envy in how societies treat merchants, where all of the major pre-Western civilizations like Rome, India, China, or Islam purposely went through a phase of making their societies poorer through decommercialization, through the ruling classes regulating the merchants out of social power and wealth. The merchants have always attracted tremendous amounts of envy, since anyone can become a wealthy shoe salesman, but the aristocracy is inaccessible and stems from birth, meaning you're not judged for not being able to become an aristocrat. This manifests even further through the treatment of middlemen minorities, like the Jews, overseas Chinese, Indians, and the like, who have often been horribly treated by the majority populations in countries they have lived in through being better merchants. Christianity is the religion that suppresses envy the best, as shown in guilt-based societies having the least envy, since they believe in an objective God rather than the group's whims, and a big reason for the West's success across its history was the suppression of envy that allowed for the mass accumulation of wealth and technological advances. A big reason that the US is the biggest economy in the world is that the US is by far the least envious society in the world. As Christianity became weaker, it lost envy controls, which meant the 20th century saw the rise of some literally envy-driven societies. The Nazi persecution of the Jews has very clearly driven off millennia-old envy of the Jews' financial abilities. However, communism is an envy-driven ideology. Communism's continual popularity, even though it's failed so many times in every continent, climate, and civilization, making the poor even poorer, only makes sense due to envy. Intellectuals' attraction to communism stems from how they wish they had more social power, envy the politicians and businessmen who have it, and view communism as the only way that they can seize wealth and power. You can tell that envy is the dominant social form when it blames all of society's ills on the powerful and gives the weak no responsibility at all. Traditional religions are much better faith ways to help the poor, since they give the poor their own agency on how to live happy lives and be responsible. Meanwhile, communism says all the evil in the world comes from the rich. Once you kill the rich, we will all be living in utopia, and you can't blame the lower class people for anything since they're inherently powerless. However, from any reasonable point of view, you would know that both the rich and poor have strengths and weaknesses from being normal people. In modern leftism, to tell the oppressed to lose weight or have any standards at all for moral conduct for women, ethnic, or sexual minorities will make you tarred and feathered as evil. I was reading a biography of Mao Zedong. An interesting thing is in China during his reign, they made women wear these really baggy, unattractive dresses. And that was because people were envious of women being able to wear more appealing clothing, thus letting beautiful women have greater advantages. And also there were times when they banned Chinese movies from having attractive actresses because some women were having advantages from their natural beauty over other women. And you see similar trends today with people talking about pretty privilege or it being fat shaming to tell women to lose weight, even though you can lose weight and it's a statement of personal responsibility and something that we can all do. And this is because unattractive women are envious of more attractive women, and fundamentally, attractive women are just a positive force in the world, and they make life better without any real cost. All social growth and maturity is based upon entrenching responsibility. The envious despise responsibility, and you see this in communism's strangling of the individual into the collective. In the same way, shame-based cultures deal with their own anxieties about life by surrendering individual responsibility to the group. Communist societies killed their own middle classes and starved their own populations through collectivism, even when the effect was the death of millions, since they put hurting the haves above helping the have-nots. Oftentimes when communism says kill the rich, they're killing peasant farmers who have a couple more cows and maybe a tile roof rather than a thatched roof, because it's not about killing the rich, it's about the envious hating those who are better off than them. Communism's complete lack of a moral compass, killing as many people as every other religion and ideology combined in history, suggests that they are really an envious hatred of the world and life. If you were to imagine up an ideology based off envy as a hypothetical fantasy thought experiment, I could literally not tell you how it would be any different from how communism manifested in our world. Envy is literally the worst of all the moral pillars here. Even disgust, which is racism, still can work for thousands of years straight to form stable societies. However, envy-based cultures, once they eat their own successful classes, immediately start to decay. Once the Soviet Union stopped being able to conquer its neighbors, exploit its own territory, exploit its own environment, or kill its own landholding class, it stopped growing, which is exactly what you would expect from an envy-driven society. Number 7, anxiety. You know how the news media treats everything like it's the end of the world? Or how crime rates a couple years ago were the lowest in American history, but parents have been scared to let their kids play outside? How everything fun requires miles of liability paperwork? Or how society has loads of useless regulations or security theater in airports, none of which are really effective, except at assuaging the herd's worries? The US after 9/11 literally spent the net worth of Taiwan on the war on terror for basically no results. These are the markers of an anxiety-based culture. This is a moral axis I should probably make a video in of itself about, since it's so decisive to our modern society. However, Nassim Taleb has a book called Anti-Fragile, which is about how some things, like societies or children, need to face threats and struggle in order to be able to strengthen and develop themselves properly. When they're coddled, they're actually less safe, since they haven't seen enough of the world to learn to be competent actors. In our modern society where we don't wage war, farm our own food, or have kids at age 21, we just don't have enough stress in our lives to be able to contextualize, maybe I shouldn't worry about what Star Wars movie someone's watching, or what someone tweets about transgender people, when the Mongols or plague could fucking kill me. Anxiety is the inability to deal with death, thus causing the constant fear that is anxiety. In our modern society, we have no afterlife to assuage our fears of death. We have no idea of any strong values we could use to guide ourselves or find a direction that we can use to go forward. We don't really have strong families or friend groups to make the pain of life more fun to bear, and we only judge life through material or sexual success. So of course we feel anxious, because we feel lost in the world. People thus dawdle on luxuries and Epicureanism as a way to forget death. One of the best anthropology books I've ever read is called The Lonely Crowd by David Reisman. It's about how American society shifted from a Christian guilt-based axis in the 19th century to an anxiety one in the 20th. He goes through how every aspect of American society between film, education, politics, workplace, and child rearing show a shift from a society based around following the idea of being upright before God to one where you try to please your social group. In Western countries, the countrysides, especially in the US, are still guilt-driven and the city's anxiety, with this being the foundation of the culture wars. I mean, in my personal story, when I moved from rural Pennsylvania where I grew up to Los Angeles, it felt like I was entering a totally different civilization. You can tell our society is based around anxiety from how it interacts with the world, and also through how it constructs its goals and worldview. Again, this deserves a video in of itself, so I'll be somewhat spare with details. However, our culture is constantly worrying that the world will end, whether through climate change, collapse in sperm count, nuclear war, overpopulation, and about 20 other things. We respond to all crises, whether national elections, 9/11, and the like, with mass emotion, well, the more responsible thing to do would be stoicism, since anxiety only succeeds at lessening virility and working people into a frenzy. Political correctness and the modern post-communist left are great examples of an anxiety-based worldview. It's a political view fundamentally based off looking like you have the correct views rather than actually pushing what's effective. You see this in how leftist policies have continually failed, and left-wing areas in America are often the most segregated, unequal, have the most social problems and the like. A great example of this is with transgender people, where society expects everyone to affirm transgender people's gender identities, but if these people weren't already anxious, they wouldn't have psychological collapses from that, and it wouldn't be a problem. The book's called The Lonely Crowd, since it's based upon the idea that everyone in society is looking for social approval, which is viewed as the most important thing in society, thus everyone is in the crowd. But the crowd is lonely since no one's being authentic. I think this is a perfect description of nightclubs. Also, look at the change in youth culture in the 19th and 20th centuries. Books for teens in the 19th century were about high adventure, love, and glorious deeds. Teen content since World War II treats partying, sex, and being popular as moral goods in of themselves and legitimately important things. Your popularity in high school really is not. I had a dinner party last week where I invited some friends over, and we were all talking about how we wanted to dress up more, but there aren't enough social events where you legitimately do get to dress up. So we all dressed up in a really nice way, and that was a lot of fun. And I think part of the reason modern society doesn't do stuff like dress up is the thing we're most scared of is trying to look like we're better than someone else. So we don't wear tuxedos or nice hats or anything like that because they would signal that we're trying to show like we hold ourselves to some higher standard. Well, in reality, we're just trying to blend in and wear some shitty t-shirt or hoodie. Well, that's not really what people want. Look at Gen Z today, where I'm sure many people in this audience personally identify with anxiety, since it seems like the vast majority of young people suffer from anxiety in their actual lives today. I mean, I do. I've had times where I'm unduly anxious for no real reason. The modern West today is incapable of making any strong decisions, including waging war, making personal sacrifices and the like, while demonizing masculinity and heroism. Anxiety is fundamentally the emotion behind decadence. Society cares only about assuaging the anxieties of the weak, rather than preserving itself for future generations, thus making itself become strong, doing great deeds and that sort. This is not the first time we've had anxiety-based cultures. Anxiety-based cultures happen kind of like the opposite of fear, when societies have pushed the real world too far away, and thus objective things to stand against, and instead base a society upon pleasing large social hierarchies that are really the way to get ahead and succeed in society. David Reisman in The Lonely Crowd likes to say that in the 19th century you became successful through building a factory or setting up a silver mine in the West, while in the 20th it was through rising up in a corporate hierarchy. Most of the people I know went at top universities aren't people that are actually that innovative or brave or people you want to lead. They're mostly just people pleasers who checked off all the boxes. Other anxiety-based societies are in the Roman Empire, the Greeks as they were falling apart, or in the courts of Tsarist Russia or l'Ancien Regime pre-revolutionary France, in all of which following fashions was the way to gain social authority, by being popular. In the same way that pride is the most masculine of these emotions, anxiety is the most feminine. Anxiety-based societies all give women significant social authority and power, who tend to be better at navigating these kinds of court-based structures. And also, women can afford to be more anxious and emotional since men are judged for not being brave or for not showing competency, while women are allowed to have more of their emotions. Amaury de Riacourt liked to say that once the population is constantly looking for approval and anxious, it loses its own sense of direction. Thus, people turn their attention to a Caesar to lead them and sublimate their anxieties and surrender to totalitarianisms. This is how France fell to the Jacobins and then Napoleon, Russia to Stalin, Rome to Caesar, Greece to Alexander, and then petty tyrants. That's not going to happen to us, right?